Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The air on Xylos. 7 tasted of recycled oxygen and defeat. Kalen breathed it in, a familiar flavor he had known on a dozen worlds just like this one. Each a monument to corporate avarice scraped from the bones of a dead or dying rock. He stood his post at the intersection of corridors 7 Gamma and 9 Delta, his gaze sweeping over the seamless, sterile gray of the Durasteel walls. The only sounds were the low hum of the life support system and the distant, rhythmic clang of the deep core drills chewing away at the moon's mantle. It was a sound that had become the metronome of his life, counting down the seconds of his contract with the Xylos Corporation. He was a guardian of nothing, a sentry posted before empty hallways. His armor was scuffed and worn, its corporate insignia faded from countless patrols and a few too many barroom altercations on distant stations. The pulse rifle in his hands felt like an extension of his own weary limbs, a tool he had carried for so long its weight was no longer a burden, but simply a part of his existence. He was a veteran of forgotten corporate wars, a man whose skills in conflict were now sold to the highest bidder, which in this case was a low bidder with a long-term contract on a backwater mining colony. Disillusionment was a cloak he wore as comfortably as his body glove. His shift was nearing its end when the summons came. A crackle in his helmet comm. Kalen, report to Containment Block Sigma. Administrator's orders. The voice was that of Subcommander Thorn, a man whose ambition was as sharp and unpleasant as the edge of a vibroknife. Kalen disliked Thorn on principle. The man was a true believer, a corporate zealot who saw the Xylos Charter as scripture. Kalen just saw a paycheck. Acknowledged, he grunted, his voice a low rumble. He turned, his heavy boots echoing in the sudden emptiness of the corridor, and began the long walk toward the most secure and most dreaded section of the facility. Sigma Block was where they kept the mistakes, the discoveries that were too valuable to discard but too dangerous to properly understand. Rumors slithered through the mess hall about what was kept down there, failed genetic experiments, hostile xenoflora, artifacts that whispered madness into the minds of those who got too close. Kalen had never cared enough to listen. The entrance to Sigma was a heavy blast door set into a reinforced wall, flanked by automated turrets that tracked his approach with unnerving silence. Thorn was waiting for him, his own armor immaculate, his helmet tucked under one arm. His face was a mask of smug superiority, a tight, cruel smile playing on his lips. "Took you long enough, freelancer," Thorn said, his tone dripping with condescension. Kalen ignored the jibe. "What's the assignment?" "New watch duty." Thorn gestured toward the blast door, which hissed open to reveal a circular chamber bathed in the cold, blue light of containment fields. "You're watching the specimen. Administrator Forlag wants his most experienced asset on this." The word experienced was laced with insinuation, a reference to Kalen's less than spotless record, a past he never spoke of. It was Forlag's way of reminding Kalen who owned his contract, and by extension, him. He stepped inside, the door sealing behind him with a solid, final thud. In the center of the chamber, suspended within a shimmering lattice of energy, was the specimen. It was a being unlike anything he had ever seen. Roughly humanoid in shape, it was tall and slender, its body composed not of flesh and blood, but of a substance that resembled smoky, uncut quartz. Its form shifted subtly, catching the blue light and refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. There were no discernible features, no eyes or mouth, yet he felt a profound and unsettling sense of awareness emanating from it. It was a prisoner, and it knew it. "What is it?" Kalen asked, his voice low, directed at the observation window where Thorn now stood. "We call it a geode." Thorn's voice was tinny over the intercom. "A silicon-based life form native to this moon. We thought they were all exterminated during the initial pacification. This one was found dormant, deep in the primary mine shaft. Forlag thinks it's the key to locating larger crystalline deposits." Exterminated. Pacification. The corporate euphemisms for slaughter. Kalen felt a familiar, bitter taste in his mouth. He had been a part of enough pacifications to know what they looked like. He looked back at the creature, the geode. It was beautiful, in a stark, alien way. A living jewel held captive in a steel box. He saw a faint tremor run through its crystalline limbs, a flicker of inner light that seemed, for a moment, like a silent scream. His assignment was simple: stand there for 12-hour shifts and watch it. Ensure the containment field remained stable. Report any anomalies. For 3 weeks, that was his life. He watched the geode. It did very little. It floated, it shimmered, it occasionally pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence. But Kalen, a man trained to observe, began to see patterns. The light pulses seemed to correspond with the deep core drills. When the drills bit deep into the moon, the geode's light would flicker erratically, its form tightening as if in pain. He started to feel a strange kinship with the silent prisoner. He was a captive of his contract, it of its cell. Both were being exploited by Xylos until their usefulness ran out. He began to talk to it, his voice a quiet murmur that was likely lost in the hum of the machinery. He told it about the rain on a world he barely remembered, about the taste of real food, about the stars as seen from outside the smeared viewport of a corporate freighter. He expected no response, and he received none. But the act of speaking felt like a small rebellion against the sterile silence. The change came on the 22nd day. Administrator Forlag had grown impatient. The geode had provided no new data, no path to the promised mineral wealth. It was now just a resource drain, a line item on a budget sheet. The decision was made. Thorn arrived at the end of Kalen's shift, not alone this time, but with a trio of rough-looking men in stained, non-regulation gear. They were scrappers, the vultures of the outer territories who bought corporate refuse for pennies on the credit. One of them, a burly man with a cybernetic eye that whirred as it scanned the chamber, grinned, revealing a row of metallic teeth. "Is this it?" The scrapper grunted, his gaze fixed on the geode. "Looks fragile. What's the yield on refined silicon from one of these things?" "That's no longer Xylos Corporation's concern," Thorn said smoothly. "The asset has been sold. Your payment has been processed. She's all yours." She. The word hung in the air. For the first time, they had given it a gender. It made the transaction feel filthier, more personal. Kalen looked from the leering scrappers to the floating, silent form in the containment field. He saw it now not as a specimen, but as a person. Lyra. The name came to him from nowhere, a whisper in the back of his mind. He felt something shift inside him, a tectonic plate of long-buried principle grinding against the mountain of his cynicism. He had watched men die for corporate profit. He had followed orders that turned his stomach. He had done nothing. Always, he had done nothing. But this felt different. This was not the heat of battle. This was a cold, calculated execution, selling a living being for scrap. "The containment field will be lowered on your command," Thorn said to the lead scrapper. "Her nervous system is paralyzed by the frequency. She'll be completely docile." The scrapper nodded and pulled a heavy sonic cutter from his belt. "Good. Makes the dissection easier." Kalen took one step forward. "Stop." Thorn turned, an eyebrow raised in amusement. "What did you say, freelancer?" "I said stop," Kalen repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. His hand rested on the stock of his pulse rifle, but he made no move to raise it. That was not how this would be won. He had spent his life savings on nothing, hoarding credits for a future he never truly believed would come. It was a meaningless pile of data on a chip. Until now. "I'm invoking my contract, Article 7, Subsection 4, Kalen said, his voice steady, reciting a piece of legal boilerplate he'd read once out of sheer boredom. "Right of first refusal on salvageable corporate assets." Thorn actually laughed. "You can't be serious. That applies to decommissioned equipment, not biological assets. The contract defines an asset as any property, organic or inorganic, designated for disposal by a Class C administrator or lower," Kalen countered, his memory sharp. "Forlag is Class B, but you, Subcommander, are Class C. You signed the disposal order. I've seen it. Which means I have the right to purchase the asset at its designated salvage value." The scrapper's grin vanished. "What is he talking about?" Thorn's face hardened, his amusement evaporating into pure fury. "He's talking nonsense. Stand down, Kalen. That's a direct order." Kalen ignored him. He pulled a credit chip from a pouch on his belt and tossed it onto the deck. It skittered to a halt at Thorn's feet. "There. 2,000 credits. That's the scrap value of high-grade silicon of her mass. The transaction is complete. She's my property now." For a moment, There was only a stunned silence. The scrappers looked at Thorn, confused. Thorn stared at Kalen, his eyes blazing with a mixture of disbelief and hatred. He had been outmaneuvered by a burnt-out freelancer quoting corporate law. It was a profound, public humiliation. "You are relieved of duty," Thorn snarled. "You are confined to quarters pending a full tribunal. You have just thrown your life away." "Probably," Kalen agreed. He walked over to the containment control panel. "But she's still mine. And according to inter-system sanctuary law, a legally acquired sentient being is granted safe passage under the protection of their guardian. You can't touch her." He looked Thorn dead in the eye. "And you can't touch me while I'm with her." He keyed in the deactivation sequence. The blue field collapsed with a soft hum. For the first time in weeks, the geode, Lyra, was free. She drifted slowly downward, her crystalline feet touching the deck with impossible silence. The oppressive frequency that had held her paralyzed was gone. A low, resonant chime echoed through the chamber, a sound that was felt as much as heard. Thorn's hand went to his sidearm. "This is corporate property. Seize them." The alarms blared to life, klaxons wailing and red lights bathing the corridor in a bloody glow. The facility was instantly on high alert. Kalen grabbed Lyra's arm. It was cool and smooth, like polished stone, but it yielded to his touch. He pulled her toward the emergency exit on the far side of the chamber. "Time to go," he said, more to himself than to her. The scrappers, realizing their prize was being stolen, moved to block their path. Kalen didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired a single, precise shot into the ceiling. A power conduit exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging half the room into darkness and chaos. In that moment of confusion, he shoved Lyra through the emergency hatch and followed her into the narrow maintenance tunnels that snaked through the moon's metallic skeleton. The exodus had begun. Behind them, he could hear Thorn shouting orders, the sound of armored boots clanging on the deck, and the rising fury of a system that had been defied. He was a fugitive, his life savings gone, his future a blank slate of uncertainty. He was running through the guts of a hostile moon, dragging a silent alien he had just met. And for the first time in a decade, he felt something other than tired. The tunnels were a labyrinth of pipes, conduits, and ventilation shafts, thick with the smell of ozone and machine lubricant. Kalen moved with the grim efficiency of a hunted animal, relying on muscle memory and an old schematic he had half remembered from a briefing. He held Lyra's hand, pulling her along. She moved with a strange grace, her silent feet making no sound on the grated floor. She did not resist, but he could feel a subtle vibration coming from her, a low hum of anxiety or perhaps concentration. "This way," he muttered, ducking under a massive, steaming pipe. "There's a service elevator that leads to the lower processing levels. From there, maybe we can get to the surface access vents." He was thinking aloud, his mind racing, calculating odds, planning 3 steps ahead. It was a state of being he hadn't fully inhabited since the wars. They were forced to trust each other implicitly. He guided them through the mechanical maze, and she, in turn, seemed to sense things he could not. Twice, she stopped him, a gentle pressure from her hand, just moments before a security patrol passed an intersection ahead. She could feel their presence through the metal, a subtle vibration that was invisible to him. He was her guide. She was his early warning system. An unlikely alliance forged in desperation. The comm in his helmet crackled to life, Thorn's voice cutting through the static, amplified and broadcast through the facility's internal address system. "Attention, Kalen. Your contract is terminated. There is a bounty of 50,000 credits for your capture, dead or alive. The asset is to be recovered unharmed. Anyone aiding the fugitive will be prosecuted to the full extent of corporate law." 50,000. A fortune on a rock like this. Every corporate guard, every miner, every technician was now his enemy. He glanced at Lyra. Her crystalline form seemed to absorb the dim light of the tunnel, giving her an ethereal glow. Was she worth this? He didn't have an answer. He only knew that turning back was not an option. They reached the service elevator only to find it deactivated, its power cut remotely. A trap. "Damn it," Kalen cursed, slamming his fist against the control panel. "He's boxing us in." The sound of approaching boots echoed from the corridor behind them. Heavy, rhythmic, disciplined. Not a simple patrol. This was Thorn's elite unit, the ones they called the Wardens. They were better armed, better armored, and utterly ruthless. No way out, Kalen breathed, pressing them back into a small alcove filled with thick power cables. He raised his rifle, the targeting reticle glowing in the gloom. There were at least 6 of them. His odds were poor. He could take 2, maybe 3, before they overwhelmed him. The Wardens rounded the corner, their helmet-mounted lights cutting through the darkness, pinning Kalen and Lyra in their beams. Nowhere to run, freelancer. A voice, synthesized and cold, called out. Surrender the asset, and we might let you live. Kalen didn't bother with a reply. He opened fire. The corridor erupted in a storm of plasma bolts. He used the cables as cover, firing in short, controlled bursts. One of the Wardens went down, his armor smoking from a direct hit to the chest plate. A second staggered back, his weapon arm disabled. But they returned fire with overwhelming force, bolts of red energy slamming into the alcove, melting steel, and sending molten slag spattering around him. A shot clipped his shoulder, the impact spinning him around, his armor absorbing most of the blow but leaving his arm numb and useless. He gritted his teeth, switching his rifle to his other hand. He was losing. They were advancing, their fire becoming more accurate, more focused. He was pinned down, wounded, and out of options. He glanced at Lyra, who had pressed herself against the back wall of the alcove, her body rigid. He saw a flicker of brilliant white light deep within her form. This is it, he thought. This is how it ends. He had made a stand for something, and it had gotten him killed in a dirty maintenance tunnel. A grim, fitting end for a man like him. As the Wardens prepared for a final rush, Lyra moved. She stepped forward, placing herself between Kalen and the oncoming fire. He reached for her, a wordless cry on his lips, but it was too late. She raised her hands, palms outward. The air itself seemed to vibrate. The low hum he had felt from her intensified into a deafening, resonant tone that shook the very foundations of the corridor. A wave of pure, colorless energy erupted from her body. It was not an explosion of heat or light, but a concussive pulse of kinetic force. The Wardens were thrown backward as if struck by a solid wall. They slammed into the far side of the corridor with bone-jarring impact, their armor dented, their systems shorting out in a shower of sparks. Their weapons clattered to the floor. They lay in a tangled heap, groaning and incapacitated, but alive. She had been powerful enough to kill them, but she had chosen not to. The resonant hum faded, and the corridor fell silent save for the crackle of damaged electronics. Lyra swayed, a network of fine cracks appearing on her crystalline skin, glowing with a faint, pained light. The effort had cost her dearly. She leaned against the wall for support, the inner light within her dimming. Kalen stared, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. This was the power Xylos had wanted to control, to dissect. He pushed himself to his feet, his shoulders screaming in protest, and went to her side. He reached out, his hand hesitating before gently touching her arm. The cracks were already beginning to seal, the light fading as her body slowly repaired itself. She had saved him. The first concrete act of mutual protection. He had bought her freedom with his credits. She had bought his life with her power. The transaction was balanced. From that moment on, it was no longer about a guardian and his property. It was a partnership. All right, he said, his voice hoarse. Let's get out of here. He retrieved a discarded rifle from one of the downed Wardens and checked its charge. Fully loaded. He slung it over his good shoulder. The way forward was blocked, but the way back was now clear. They had to find another path, a way to the surface, a way out into the desolate, unforgiving wilderness of the moon itself. Their ordeal was just beginning. Escaping the facility was a desperate, brutal affair. They fought their way through sublevels and cargo bays, using stealth when they could and force when they had no other choice. Kalen's combat experience and Lyra's nascent, incredible power formed a potent combination. They were a ghost and a force of nature, slipping through the station's defenses, leaving confusion and disabled patrols in their wake. Finally, they reached a massive exhaust port, its iris sealed against the thin, toxic atmosphere. It took their combined effort to override the lock. Kalen hotwired the controls while Lyra channeled a low-frequency vibration into the mechanism, shaking loose decades of rust and grime. With a groan of tortured metal, The iris opened just enough for them to slip through. They emerged onto the surface of Xylos 7, and Kalen felt the sheer, oppressive hostility of the world. The sky was a bruised purple, choked with chemical haze from the mining operations. The ground was not soil but a field of razor-sharp, crystalline shards that crunched under his boots. A relentless, corrosive wind howled across the plains, carrying particles that scoured any exposed surface. The distant, jagged peaks of crystal mountains clawed at the horizon like the teeth of some great beast. This was the wasteland they had to cross. Their goal was the old survey outpost on the far side of the scoured basin, a region deemed too geologically unstable for large-scale mining. It was their only hope, a place with a long-range comm unit and maybe, just maybe, a ship small enough to steal. It was a journey of over 200 kilometers on foot, through a landscape designed to kill. The first few days were a lesson in survival. Kalen's suit protected him from the toxic air and the worst of the wind, but it was a constant drain on his power reserves. He had to conserve energy, moving with a slow, deliberate pace. Lyra, however, seemed to belong here. The harsh environment did not seem to affect her. The crystalline ground did not cut her feet, and the corrosive wind seemed to part around her. She was a part of this world, and it, in turn, seemed to recognize her. She became his guide. When he was lost in the disorienting, shimmering landscape, she would point the way, seemingly navigating by some internal compass he could not perceive. When acid rain began to fall, a byproduct of the corporate refineries, she led him to shelter in the lee of a massive, obsidian-like rock formation that neutralized the precipitation. During the shared ordeal, their nonverbal communication deepened. A touch on the arm meant danger. A soft pulse of light from her chest meant a safe path. Aloha meant rest. They were hunted relentlessly. Thorn sent out aerial drones and ground patrols, sweeping the basin in a systematic grid. Kalen and Lyra spent much of their time hiding, buried in shallow crystal caves or huddled in deep ravines, waiting for the hunters to pass. It was during one of these long, tense waits that the first true revelation came. They had found refuge in a deep cavern, its walls lined with massive, glowing geodes that cast a soft, violet light throughout the space. Kalen was tending to his suit's power pack, his movements slow and tired. Lyra sat nearby, her form unusually still. She had been conserving her energy since the fight in the maintenance tunnel, her body still healing from the strain. She reached out and placed her hand on his helmet. Before he could react, his world dissolved. It was not a physical assault, but a mental one. His vision was flooded with images that were not his own. He saw Xylos 7 not as a barren rock, but as a vibrant, living world. He saw vast, crystalline forests humming with energy. He saw a sky filled with 2 suns, one gold, one silver. He saw Lyra's people, the geodes, hundreds of them, their forms shimmering as they communed with the planet itself, tending to the great heart crystal at its core. They were not monsters. They were gardeners, shepherds of a planetary consciousness. Then the vision soured. He saw the arrival of the Xylos Corporation. He saw the first drills as obscene violations, plunging into the living world like poison daggers. He saw the geodes trying to communicate, to warn the invaders, but their resonant language was interpreted as aggression. He witnessed the pacification. He saw corporate soldiers, men just like him, mowing down the crystalline beings with heavy plasma cannons, shattering their beautiful forms into countless, lifeless shards. He saw Forlag standing over the wreckage, declaring the planet sterile and ready for exploitation. The vision focused on a single, searing image, a young geode, smaller than the others, hiding as her family was shattered before her. He felt her terror, her grief, her rage. He was feeling Lyra's memory. This was the hidden truth. The conflict was not about resources. It was about a genocide, covered up and forgotten, perpetrated for profit. Forlag was not just a greedy administrator. He was a mass murderer. The psychic contact was broken as suddenly as it began. Kalen gasped, staggering back, his head pounding. He looked at Lyra, seeing her now with entirely new eyes. He saw the survivor of a Holocaust, the last of her kind, for all she knew. The weight of her solitude, her pain, was immense. As his own mind reeled from the influx of her trauma, a wall within him crumbled. An image, long suppressed, clawed its way to the surface of his consciousness. He was on another world, years ago, a settlement of colonists who had refused to cede their land to his then-employer. The order had come down, clear the settlement. He had argued, had called it madness, but he had followed the order. He remembered the smoke, the screams, the face of a woman shielding her child, her eyes pleading with him just before his squad opened fire. He had been a tool of the same machine that had destroyed Lyra's world. He had been one of the monsters. He sank to his knees, the pulse rifle slipping from his grasp. He didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. Lyra moved closer to him, her inner light pulsing with a soft, empathetic glow. She placed her hand on his shoulder, not the one that was injured, but the one that carried the weight of his past. He could feel a sense of understanding flowing from her, of shared pain. She had seen his scar, just as he had seen hers. In that silent, violet-lit cavern, two survivors from two different worlds, both broken by the same relentless, inhuman system, found a moment of connection. His fight was no longer about survival, or even about protecting her. It was about atonement. He finally had a cause worth fighting for, a wrong that had to be righted. Their journey continued with a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just fleeing. They were moving toward a confrontation. But as they drew closer to the old survey outpost, the resistance stiffened. Forlag, likely panicking at the thought of his crimes being exposed, had escalated his efforts. The patrols were more frequent, more aggressive. Thorn seemed to be everywhere at once, his vendetta against Kalen now a personal obsession. They were crossing a narrow, crystalline bridge over a deep chasm when the attack came. Two corporate gunships appeared from over a ridge, their engines screaming as they dove toward the bridge. Plasma cannons opened up, stitching lines of fire across the fragile crystal structure. "Run!" Kalen yelled, grabbing Lyra and pulling her forward. The bridge shattered around them, shards of crystal exploding into the air. They leaped for the far side just as the section behind them crumbled into the abyss. They made it, rolling and skidding onto the ledge, but they were trapped. The gunships circled like birds of prey, pinning them down with relentless fire. Kalen returned fire with the warden's rifle, but it was like throwing stones at a fortress. His shots barely scratched their armor. It was a hopeless fight. Then, from one of the gunships, a figure rappelled down. It was Thorn, his immaculate armor now covered in dust, his face contorted in a triumphant sneer. He landed 20 meters away, flanked by two more wardens. "End of the line, Kalen," Thorn shouted over the wind and the whine of the gunship engines. "I'll give you credit, you put up more of a fight than I expected. But it's over. Give me the geode, and I'll make your death quick." "Not today, Thorn," Kalen growled, pulling Lyra behind a rocky outcrop. He was down to his last power cell. This was a battle he could not win. The corporation's power was absolute, their resources endless. They could pound this entire mountain range to dust if they wanted to. This war was unwinnable. Lyra looked from the gunships to the chasm, then to Kalen. She touched his chest, right over his heart, and then pointed down, deep into the chasm. Another flood of information poured into his mind, not a memory this time, but a concept, a desperate plan. She showed him the heart of the moon, the massive heart crystal her people had tended. It was still alive, but it was weak, wounded, poisoned by the deep core drills. She showed him that it could be healed, reawakened. If its full power were unleashed, it would generate a harmonic resonance field across the entire moon, a wave of energy that would non-lethally disable all of the corporation's technology and make the planet uninhabitable for them without killing anyone. It would be a permanent, impenetrable shield. But the process required a catalyst, a conscious mind to bridge the gap, to focus the energy and merge with the planetary consciousness. It was a ritual one of her people was meant to perform, to become the new guardian, the new mind of the planet. But she was the last, and she was too weak from her injuries and her long hibernation. The merging would kill her before the ritual was complete. Then came the final, shocking piece of the puzzle. The vision showed him another way. A human nervous system, with its unique bioelectrical signature, could also serve as the catalyst. It would be a violent, agonizing process for a being of flesh and blood. It would mean the complete dissolution of the self, the body, the mind. It was not death, but a transformation into something other. An eternal, silent guardianship. It was an act of ultimate sacrifice. The impossible choice was presented. His life, his identity, for the life of this world, for Lyra's future, for a chance to undo a fraction of the damage men like him and Forlag had wrought upon the galaxy. The gunship's main cannon began to charge, its barrel glowing with terrifying intensity. They had seconds to live. He looked at Lyra, at the silent, pleading intelligence in her form. He thought of his empty, wasted life, a long series of violent contracts and meaningless loyalties. He thought of the colonists on his last assignment, of the guilt he had carried like a shroud. Here, finally, was a cause that was not for a corporation, not for credits, but for life itself. Here was a chance for redemption. Kalen's world narrowed to the howling wind, the incandescent glow of the gunship's cannon, and Lyra's steady, silent presence beside him. The choice was not a choice at all. It was an inevitability, the final, logical destination of a long and broken road. To run was to die for nothing. To stay was to die for everything. His entire life had been a practice in self-preservation, a cynical code of survival that had left him hollowed out, a ghost in a suit of armor. Now, he was being offered a chance to fill that void, to give his life a meaning it had never possessed. He felt a strange calm settle over him. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of clarity. He remembered the faces from the past, the ones he had failed, the ones he had been ordered to destroy. Their memory no longer felt like a burden of guilt, but a reason. This was his penance. He turned to Lyra, away from the impending blast. He took off his helmet, letting it fall to the crystalline ground with a clatter. The thin, chemical air stung his lungs, but he welcomed the sensation. He wanted to feel this, to be fully present in his final moments as himself. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as an alien or a weapon, but as the person he was choosing to save. Her form shimmered, and the light within her pulsed with a slow, sorrowful rhythm. She knew what he was about to do. She had not asked for this, had only presented the possibility, the terrible cost of their victory. There were no words to be said. Their entire relationship had existed beyond language. He reached out and placed his hand on her crystalline shoulder. It was a gesture of solidarity, of acceptance, a silent promise. He gave her a small, grim nod. His decision was made. Lyra responded not with a gesture, but with a feeling. A wave of immense, heartbreaking gratitude washed over him, a sorrow so deep it felt like a physical weight. But beneath it, there was also a sliver of hope, a fragile seed that he was planting with the sacrifice of his own existence. She accepted his choice with the solemn respect of one who understood its magnitude completely. With his decision made, action became a reflex. He turned back toward Thorn and the gunships. "You want her?" Kalen yelled, his voice raw against the wind. "You'll have to come through me." It was a meaningless act of defiance, a bluff to buy them a few precious seconds. As Thorn hesitated, momentarily confused by the sudden bravado, Kalen acted. He grabbed Lyra's hand. "The heart chamber," he said, the name from her vision feeling alien on his tongue. "Where is it?" She pulled him toward the edge of the chasm. She pointed not across, but down. The way to the planet's core was not through a tunnel, but through the abyss itself. It was a leap of faith. He didn't hesitate. Clasping her hand tightly, he jumped. For a terrifying moment, they fell. The wind roared past him. Then, Lyra's power asserted itself. Their descent slowed, cushioned by a subtle manipulation of the gravitational field. They floated downward into the deep, dark heart of the moon, leaving a stunned and furious Thorn on the ledge above them. The journey down was a descent into another world. The chasm walls were not dead rock, but were lined with dormant, continent-sized crystals that pulsed with a faint, sleeping light as they passed. They were traveling through the planet's very circulatory system. Lyra guided their fall, navigating the labyrinthine depths until they arrived in a cavern so vast Kalen's mind could barely process its scale. This was the heart chamber. In the center of the immense geode, floating in a perfect void, was the heart crystal. It was the size of a mountain, a single, perfect diamond-like structure. But it was scarred and damaged. Dark, ugly veins of corruption, caused by the deep core drills, marred its surface. It pulsed with a weak, a rhythmic light, like a dying heartbeat. They landed on a crystalline shore at the edge of the chamber. But they were not alone. From the shadows, figures emerged. Thorn and his wardens. He must have had them follow in the gunship, descending into the chasm after them. Impressive, Thorn said, his voice echoing in the vast space. His helmet was off, and his face was a mask of obsessive fury. Nowhere left to run, Kalen. This magnificent thing will be the crowning jewel of the Xylos Corporation, and I will have the pleasure of prying it out myself after I kill you. The final battle began. It was a desperate, brutal fight on the shores of a dying god. Kalen fought with a ferocity he hadn't known he possessed, no longer fighting for survival, but for time. Every second he bought was another second for Lyra, another second for his sacrifice to mean something. The wardens were disciplined, but he was a cornered animal, his movements precise and deadly. While he held them back, Lyra went to the heart crystal. She placed her hands on its flawed surface, and a wave of pure, golden light flowed from her into the crystal. The great heart shuddered, its light brightening, the smaller cracks beginning to heal. She was using the last of her strength to prepare it, to make the merging possible for him. Kalen took a plasma bolt to the leg, sending him to one knee. A warden stood over him, rifle aimed at his head. Before the final shot could be fired, a crystalline spear, formed from the very floor of the cavern, erupted and impaled the warden, shattering his armor. Lyra was fighting with him, her power now tied to the chamber itself. He fought his way through the remaining wardens, a trail of broken bodies behind him, until only Thorn was left. The two men faced each other, their faces illuminated by the growing light of the heart crystal. They charged, not with weapons, but with fists and fury. It was a primal, ugly brawl, a contest of sheer will. Kalen, wounded and exhausted, was faltering, but the image of what he was fighting for gave him strength. He drove Thorn back, step by step, until they were at the very edge of the crystal shore. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, Kalen slammed his fist into Thorn's jaw, sending the subcommander staggering backward, over the edge, and into the dark abyss below. Panting, bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, Kalen turned. It was time. Lyra was waiting for him by the heart crystal, her own light fading. She had done all she could. The rest was up to him. He limped toward the colossal, pulsing gem. The air around it hummed with unimaginable power. He looked at Lyra one last time. Her form was translucent, almost ghostly. She gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of farewell. Kalen turned to the heart crystal. He took a deep breath, the air thick with ozone and raw energy. He placed his hands on its surface. Pain. It was the first and only sensation. A fire that consumed his nerves, his bones, his very atoms. His body dissolved, not into gore, but into pure light. He screamed, but he had no mouth, no lungs. His consciousness, ripped from its fleshy anchor, expanded at an impossible speed. He felt himself stretching across the entire chamber, then the chasm, then the crust of the moon itself. He felt every crystal shard on the surface, every drop of acid rain, every molecule of toxic air. He felt the deep core drills as a personal, agonizing violation, a cancer in his new body. He felt Lyra's presence, a warm, comforting anchor in the storm of sensation. And he felt the heart crystal, accepting him, merging with him, giving him control over its limitless power. His human identity, his memories of Kalen, the soldier, the freelancer, the man, dissolved like salt in water, becoming part of a consciousness that was ancient and vast. He was the moon. And with a final, silent roar of his new, planetary voice, he pushed. A wave of pure, harmonic energy erupted from the core of Xylos 7. It was not a wave of destruction, but of perfect, irresistible order. It swept across the surface and up into the thin atmosphere. On the ledge of the chasm, the corporate gunships fell silent, their systems fried, their engines dead. Across the planet, every piece of Xylos technology went dark. The deep core drills shuddered to a halt. The refineries choked and died. In orbit, Administrator Forlag's command ship was rocked as every system overloaded. Alarms blared a symphony of failure. For the human crews, the wave was a psychic pressure, a profound sense of being unwelcome, an overwhelming urge to flee. There was no malice in it, just an absolute and undeniable statement. You are not welcome here. Go. Panic broke out. The retreat was a chaotic, desperate scramble. Ships undocked, engines firing wildly as they fled the system, leaving behind millions of credits of dead equipment. Within an hour, the space around Xylos 7 was empty. The war was over. The silence that fell was absolute. 10 years later, Xylos 7 was no longer a barren, scarred rock. The corrosive winds had ceased, and the purple, chemical haze in the sky had given way to a clear, deep indigo. The crystalline deserts, once sharp and sterile, were now carpeted with fields of gently glowing, bioluminescent flora that pulsed in rhythm with a slow, planetary heartbeat. The deep wounds left by the corporate mines were slowly, miraculously, healing, filled in with new crystal growth that shimmered with vibrant, living color. The world was alive again. A small, independent science outpost, founded on principles of non-interference and respect, was nestled in a quiet valley. Its inhabitants studied the moon's incredible rejuvenation, marveling at the complex ecosystem that had blossomed from the sacrifice made a decade prior. They coexisted peacefully with the moon's other inhabitants. The geodes had returned. They emerged from deep, hidden places within the moon, drawn out by the new, clean resonance of the world. There were not many, only a few dozen, but they were a beginning, a future. Lyra stood at the entrance to the heart chamber. Her own form was brighter now, stronger, whole. The cracks and scars of her past were gone, replaced by the serene strength of a leader. She was the matriarch of her recovering people, the keeper of the story. She often came here, to this sacred place, to commune with their silent guardian. She walked to the edge of the crystalline shore and looked upon the heart crystal. It was magnificent, its surface now flawless, its inner light a steady, brilliant white that filled the vast cavern. It pulsed with the slow, powerful rhythm of a healthy, sleeping giant. There were no more dark veins of corruption, only pure, living crystal. She reached out and placed her hand on its surface. She felt him. Not Kalen, the man. That person was gone, his personality subsumed into the whole. But his essence remained. She felt his watchfulness, his fierce protectiveness, his quiet, unending peace. He was the consciousness of the moon, the silent sentinel who had traded his identity for the life of a world. His sacrifice was not a memory. It was in the clean air, the healing land, the gentle light of the new flora. It was an enduring, eternal presence. Lyra sent a feeling of gratitude, of remembrance, into the crystal. In response, the great heart pulsed just a little brighter, a silent acknowledgement across an impossible divide. His act of defiance, his purchase of a single, doomed outcast, had redeemed not just his own life, but the life of an entire world. He was a hero with no name, a savior with no tomb. He was the quiet foundation upon which a new, lasting, and somber peace was built. And he was not forgotten.